Hello, BookTube. It's time for the 13th and final chapter of A. Edward Newton's The Amenities of Book Collecting. Originally published as a collection in 1918 in the US, my copy is the UK edition published in 1920. The 13th chapter is entitled A Word in Memory. To have been born and lived all his life in Philadelphia, yet to be best known in London and New York, to have been the eldest son of a rich man and the eldest grandson of one of the richest men in America, yet of so quiet a retiring disposition as to excite remark, to have been but a few years out of college, yet to have achieved distinction in a field which is commonly supposed to be the browsing place of age, to have been relatively unknown in his life, and to be immortal in his death. Such are the brief outlines of the career of Harry Elkins Widener. And it is a curious commentator upon human nature that the death of one person well known to us affects us more than the deaths of hundreds or thousands not known to us at all. It is for this reason, perhaps, at a time when the papers bring us daily their record of human suffering and misery from the war in Europe, that I can forget the news of yesterday and live over again the anxious hours which followed the brief announcement that the Titanic, on her maiden voyage, the largest, finest, and fastest ship afloat, had struck an iceberg in mid-ocean, and there was grave concerns for the safety of her passengers and crew. There the first news ceased. The accident had occurred at midnight. The sea was perfectly calm. The stars shone clearly. It was bitter cold. The ship was going at full speed. A slight jar was felt, but the extent of the injury was not realized, and few passengers were alarmed. When the order to lower the boats was given, there was little confusion. The order went round women and children first. Harry and his father were lost. His mother and her maid were rescued. There is a photographic portrait of Harry Widener. And all that subsequently appeared in the press, and for days the appalling disaster was the one subject of discussion. The name of Harry Elkins Widener appeared simply as the eldest son of George D. Widener. Few knew that, quite aside from the financial prominence of his father and his social distinction and charm of his mother, Harry had a reputation which was entirely of his own making. He was a born student of bibliography. Books at once his work, his recreation, and his passion. To them he devoted all his time, but outside the circle of his intimate friends few understood the unique and lovable personality of a man to whom death came so suddenly on April 15th, 1912, shortly after he had completed his 27th year. His knowledge of books was truly remarkable. In the study of rare books, as in the study of an exact science, authority usually comes only with years. With Harry Widener, it was different. He had been collecting only since he left college, but his intense enthusiasm, his painstaking care, his devotion to a single object, his wonderful memory, and, as he gratefully says in an introduction to the catalogue of some of the more important books in his library, the interest and kindness of my grandfather and my parents had enabled him in a few years to secure a number of treasures which any collector might be proud. Harry Elkins Widener was born in Philadelphia on January 3rd, 1885. He received his early education at the Hill School, from which his grandfather, from at the Hill School, from which he was graduated in 1903. He then entered Harvard University, and he remained 4 years, receiving his bachelor's degree in 1907. It was while a student at Harvard that he first began to show an interest in book collecting, but it was not until his college days were over, as the son of a rich man, he found, as many other men has done, that the way to be happy is to have an occupation. He lived with his parents and his grandfather in their palatial residence, Linwood Hall, just outside Philadelphia. He was proud of the distinction of his relatives and used to say, "We are a family of collectors. My grandfather collects paintings, my mother collects silver and porcelains. Uncle Joe collects everything," which indeed he does, and I, books. Book collecting soon became, with him, a quite serious matter, a matter to which everything else was subordinated. He began, as all collectors do, with unimportant things at first, but how rapidly his taste developed may be seen from glancing over the pages of the catalog of his library, which, strictly speaking, is not a library at all. He would have been the last to call it so. It was but a collection of perhaps 3,000 volumes, but they were selected by a man of almost unlimited means, with rare judgment and an instinct for discovery of the best. Money alone will not make a bibliophile, although, I confess, it develops one. His first folio of Shakespeare was the Van Antwerp copy, formerly Lecker Lampson's, one of the finest copies known, and he rejoiced in a copy of poems written by William Shakespeare, Gent, 1640, in the original sheepskin binding. His Pickwick, of, if possibly inferior to, in the interest to the Harry B. Smith copy, is nevertheless superb. Indeed, he had two, one in parts as published, with all the points, another a presentation copy to Dickens' friend William Harrison Ainsworth. In addition, he had several original drawings by Seymour, including the one which the shed belied Mr. Pickwick, having with some difficulty mounted a chair, proceeds to address the club. The discovery and acquisition of this drawing, perhaps the most famous illustration ever made for a book, is indicative of Harry's taste as a collector. One of his favorite books was the Countess of Pembroke's own copy of Sir Philip Sidney's Arcadia, and it is indeed a noble volume, but Harry's love for his mother, I think, invariably led him, when he was showing his treasures, to point out a sentence written in the copy of Cowper's Task. The book had once been Thackeray's, and the great novelist had written in the frontispiece, quote, "A great point in a great man, a great love for his mother, a very fine and true portrait. Could artists possibly choose a better position than the above? W.M. Thackeray," end quote. "Isn't that a lovely sentiment?" Harry would say. And yet, they say Thackeray was a cynic and a snob. His Esmond was presented by Thackeray to Charlotte Bronte. His copy of the Inglesby Legends was unique. In the first edition, by some curious oversight on the part of the printer, page 236 had been left blank, and the error was not discovered until a few sheets had been printed. In the presentation copy to his friend E.R. Moran, on his blank page, Burham had written, and he quotes a four-line verse: "By a blunder for which I have only myself to thank, here's a page that has been somehow left blank. Ah, my friends Moran, I have you'll look in vain for the fault in one page of my book." Signing the verse with his nom de plume, Thomas Inglesby. Indeed, in all his books, the utmost care was taken to secure the copy which would have the greatest human interest. An ordinary presentation copy of the first issue of the first editions would serve his purpose only if it were sure that the dedication copy was unobtainable. His Boswell's Life of Johnson was the dedication copy to Sir Joshua Reynolds, with an inscription in the author's hands. He was always on the lookout for rarities, and Dr. Rosenbach, in the brief memoir which serves as an introduction to the catalogue of Stevenson's collection, says of him, quote, "I remember once seeing him on his hands and knees under a table in a bookstore. On the floor was a huge pile of books, and had not been disturbed for years. He had just pulled out one of the debris, a first edition of Swinburne, a presentation copy, and it was good to behold the light in his face as he exclaimed, "This is better than working in a gold mine." To him, it was one. The collection of Stevenson is a monument to his industry and patience, and is probably the first collection in existence of that much esteemed author. He possessed holographic copies of Valima letters and many other priceless treasures, and he secured the manuscript of and published privately for Stevenson lovers in the edition of 45 copies, an autobiography written by Stevenson in California in the early 80s. This item, under the title of Memoirs of Himself, has an inscription given to Isabel Stewart Strong for future use. When the underwriter is dead, with love, Robert Louis Stevenson. The catalogue of his Stevenson collection alone, the painstaking work of his friend and memoir Dr. Rosenbach, makes an imposing volume, and it is it is an invaluable work of reference for Stevenson collectors. Harry once told me that he never traveled without a copy of Treasure Island and knew it practically by heart. I myself not adverse to a good book as a traveling companion, but in my judgment, for constant reading year in year out, it would be a book which sets you thinking rather than narrative like Treasure Island. But Carson et sans go. But it were tedious to enumerate his treasures, nor is it necessary. They will ever remain a monument to his taste and skill as a collector in the keeping of Harvard University, his alma mater. It is, however, worthwhile to attempt to fix in some measure the individuality, the rare personality of a man. I cannot be mistaken in thinking that many looking at the wonderful library erected in Cambridge by his mother in his memory may wish to know something of the man himself. There is, in truth, not much to tell. A few dates have already been given, and when to these is added the statement that he was a retiring and studious disposition, considerate and courteous, little more remains to be said. He lived with and for his books, and was never so happy as when he was saying, "Now, if you will put aside that cigar for a moment, I will show you something." Cigar ashes are not good for first editions. And a moment later, some precious volume would be on your knees. What collector does not enjoy showing his treasures to others as appreciative as himself? Many delightful hours his intimates have passed in his library, which was also his bedroom, for he wanted his books about him, where he could play with them at night, and where his eye might rest on them the first thing in the morning. But this was a privilege extended only to the true book lovers. To others it was unapproachable and almost shy. To others he was unapproachable and almost shy, of unfailing courtesy and amiable and loving disposition. His friends were very dear to him. Bill, for someone else, is the salt of the earth. You would frequently hear him say, "Are you a book collector too?" His grandfather once asked me across the dining table. Laughing, I said, "I thought I was, but I am not in Harry's class." To which the old gentleman replied, and an eye beamed with pride the while, "I'm afraid that Harry will impoverish the entire family." I answered that I should be sorry to hear that, and suggested that he and I, if we put our fortunes together, might prevent this calamity. His memory was most retentive. Once let him get a fact or a date embedded in his mind, and it was there forever. He knew the name of every actor he had ever seen, and the part that he had taken in the play last year and the year before. He knew the name of every baseball player and had his batting and running average. When it came to the chief interest of his life, The thirst for knowledge was insatiable. I remember one evening when we were in New York together at Beverly Chew's library, Harry asked Mr. Chew some questions about the in eccentricities of the title page of the first edition of Milton's Paradise Lost. Mr. Chew began rolling off his bibliographical data like a ripe scholar that he was. When I suggested to Harry that he had better make a note of that, Mr. Chew was saying, what Mr. Chew was saying, he replied, "I should only lose the paper. Well, if I get it in my head, I will put it where it cannot be lost. And that is," he added, "as long as I keep my head." And this is Beverly Chew. And his memory extended to other collections than his own. For him to see a book once, for him to remember it always. If I told him I had bought such and such a book, he would know from whom I bought it and all about it, and would ask me if I noticed some special point, which in all probability had escaped me. He was a member of several clubs, including the Royal Club, and most important club of its kind in the world. The late J.B. Morgan had sent word to the chairman of the membership committee that he would like Harry to be a member. The question of a seconder was waived. It was understood that Mr. Morgan's endorsement of his protege qualifications was sufficient. And it was one night. It was one night when we were in London together during the first wholesale that I had a conversation with Harry in which the light of subsequent events I have often recurred. We had dined together at my club and had gone to the sale, and there was nothing of special interest coming up. And after half an hour or so, he suggested that we go to the theater. I reminded him that it was quite late, and at such an hour, a music hall would be best. He agreed, and in a few moments we were witnessing a very different performance from the one we had left in the Anderson auction rooms. But the performance was a poor one. Harry was restless and finally suggested that we take a walk out Fifth Avenue. During the walk, he confessed to me his longing to be identified and remembered in connection with some great library. He expanded his idea at length. He said, "I do not wish to be remembered merely as a collector of a few books, however fine they may be. I want to be remembered in connection with a great library, and I do not see how it is going to be brought about. Mr. Huntington and Mr. Morgan are buying up all the books, and Mr. Bixby is getting the manuscript. When my time comes, if it ever does, there will be nothing left for me. Everything will be gone." And there is Huntington among his books, as the caption says. We spent the night together, and after I had gone to bed, he came to my room again, and calling me by my nickname, said, "I have got to do something in connection with books, and to make myself remembered. What shall it be?" I laughingly suggested that he write one, but he said it was no jesting matter. Then it came out that he thought that he would establish a chair at Harvard for the study of bibliography in all its branches. He was much disturbed by the lack of interest which great scholars frequently evince towards his favorite subject. With this, he retired to his own room, and I went to sleep. But I have often thought of this conversation since I, with the rest of the world, learned that his mother was prepared in his memory to erect a great building at Harvard, which is his monument. His ambition has been achieved. Association with books his name will ever be. The great library at Harvard is his memorial. In its sanctum sanctorum, his collection will find a fitting place. We lunched together the day before he sailed for Europe, and I happened to remark at parting, "This time next year you will be in London, probably lunching at the Ritz." "Yes," he said, "very likely with Porch." Well, in London, Harry spent most of his time with that great bookseller, and the second to hear the name of Porch, and the second to bear the name of Porch, and who knew all the great book collectors the world over, and who once told me that he knew no man of his years who had the knowledge and taste of Harry Widener. So many of our great American collectors refer to books in terms of steel rails. With Harry, it is a genuine and all-absorbing passion, and he is entirely devoid of side and affection. And this he but echoed with a friend once said to me, at Linwood Hall, where we were spending the day. The marvel is that Harry is so entirely unspoiled by his fortune. Harry was a constant attendant at the auction rooms in Sotheby's in London, at Anderson's in New York, and wherever else good books were going. He chanced to be in London when the first part of the Huth Library was being disposed of, and he was anxious to get back to New York in time to attend the final wholesale, where he hoped to secure some books and bring to the many friends he would find there the latest gossip of the London auction rooms. Alas, Harry had bought his last book. It was the excessively rare copy of Bacon's Essays, the edition of 1598. Porch had secured it for him at the Huth sale, and as he dropped in to say goodbye and gave the final instructions for the disposition of the purchase, he said, "I think I'll take the little Bacon with me in my pocket, and if I am shipwrecked, it will go with me." And I know that it was so. In all the history of book collecting, this is the most touching story. The death of Milton's friend, Edward King, by drowning, inspired the poet to write the immortal elegy Lucidus. Who would not sing for Lucidus? He must not float upon the watery bier unwept. When Shelley's body was cast up by the waves on the shore near Via Reggio, he had a volume of Keats' poems in his pocket, doubled back at the eve of St. Agnes, and in poor Harry Widener's pocket there was Bacon, and in this Bacon we might have read, "The same man that was envied while he lived shall be loved when he is gone." And there ends chapter 13 of the amenities of book collecting, and it has a fabulous frontispiece, a caricature of two great Victorians, Thackeray and Dickens. And as I say, that ends the amenities of book collecting. It has become sort of a fixture to read essays off and on. If people, what would you like me to read next? Continue on with other books by Newton, or take a break from Newton and read some other essays by other authors? If anybody has anyone in mind, do let me know in the comments. And I want to thank everybody who has followed this through and have listened and watched to each chapter of me reading. And I do apologize for taking so long to finish off the last few chapters. There was a number of reasons for that, but yeah, we'll see if we can get back into the groove of things shortly and continue on. And I hope you've enjoyed this book too, and I certainly have. I find Newton quite fascinating, and especially his wit, and it's like I said, I've said several times, he's a person of his time, but getting beyond that, very interesting. Take care, Book 2.